Hey everyone, and welcome to Sasquatch Theory. In this episode, we have some controversy. To fully understand what is going on, you will need to go back and watch part 1 and part 2, which will be in the description down below. To summarize things up for you guys, we had a gentleman by the name of Dave who came on the show a while ago and claimed he was a contractor for the Department of Defense. He also claimed he was invited by federal agents to join up and research an active Sasquatch area. He dropped some names during the interview which honestly went right over my head because, as you guys know, I am only interested in the Bigfoot encounters. And of course, if someone in the government really is hiding this type of information, then I didn't want to take it out of the video. Well, some time passed and Troy Hudson ended up reaching out, and he rejected the things that Dave said about him. I typically would not get involved with someone saying a story is fake, but since it was his name that was brought up, I figured I would let him give his side of the story. This was a big episode on Sasquatch Chronicles on episode 463, which has always captivated my mind and made me wonder about the Sasquatch and the government. Here on Sasquatch Theory, you will hear a different side of this story. Alright guys, let's dive straight into this next Bigfoot encounter from the state of Oklahoma. All right, Troy, welcome to Sasquatch Theory. How are you doing today, sir?
I am good, sir. How are you?
Oh, pretty good. Not too bad. So, you reached out to me because of a past video that I did where a guy claims that he is a contractor for the Department of Defense and that he investigated on all these Bigfoot reports from around the state. And he happened to drop some names. And he mentioned that certain people worked for the government and they're federal agents and they go out looking for Sasquatch. Can you clarify on what he said about these researchers? Because you contacted me later on down the road. You know, you said some people were pretty upset about what was said, and here we are today.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I was forwarded that episode from numerous people. And I'm not saying I know everybody in this business, in the Sasquatch business, but I do know a lot of people. I've known a lot of people for a long time, back when everybody knew everybody. Because in the last 7 or 8 years, there's been a ton of people, come out onto the platform recently, that's that says they have background and they've been doing this for many years. Not a big deal. But I listened to the show, and yes, he did mention my name, and I don't recognize the voice. And I've been in this since about 2004. I've kept files on all my investigations. I have documentation records of all of the field expeditions that I have organized and led since in the days when I was with BFRO, because that's where I got started running and organizing expeditions. And I cannot find any documentation for this gentleman that, by going by his first name, plus the description of what he describes, that allegedly that he was on an expedition with a group and myself. I know the area that he described, that when he went on an expedition, supposedly, that we were down in the Broken Bow, Beaver's Bend area. And I am here today to tell you I have never done an expedition in Broken Bow, Hochatown, or the Beaver's Bend area. I have never done one.
What do you think his motive was if the story wasn't true and he really wasn't a part of those investigations? Do you think he's still part of the Department of Defense and he's trying to disorganize the subject and kind of confuse people or mislead people per se? Or
It is hard to try to understand someone's motives in certain things. Not ever speaking to the gentleman and asking questions of where he received his information and how he knew the things that he supposedly knew. There were he got my name right, and I did used to work for the federal government. I did my time, and so that is correct, but I was not working from Homeland Security in those days. So I've never used a government vehicle on any private or any personal venture or anything like that. So even back in the day, a government vehicle, federal government vehicles, we did not take home. We did not use them unless we were on official government business. And I was very careful of separating in those days of my Bigfoot adventures as well as what my day-to-day job was.
okay, so the Bigfoot research is separate from the work you do for the government.
Absolutely, 100%. Absolutely, 100%. Matter of fact, I try to keep it as quiet as I could until one day, back in those days when I was working for the federal government, my boss kind of came into my office one day and said, "Oh, didn't know you were into Bigfoot." Well, you probably saw the look on my face. It turned red and kind of like, well, yeah. So it was a little uncomfortable, but nothing bad about it. Nothing. It was just, everybody has their hobbies. Back then, it was a little bit of a hobby. It was something I got into because I knew something about the topic growing up in Oklahoma. I had some situations occur when I was in the Boy Scouts, and that's why I went on one of the expeditions back in the day, and that's how I, got involved. But there were no other, as he described in the episode, there were no other federal agents or federal law enforcement officers or associates or non-law enforcement federal personnel on those expeditions. So that's where I was a little confused of where in the world was he. I don't know. I don't know where, how, or why he was to say those things, because that is inaccurate. That's not what occurred. My expeditions during the days when I was in BFRO was strictly in southeast Oklahoma in the Honebi Valley area and over by Mena, Arkansas, and in North Texas. There was never any expeditions in the Broken Bow, Beavers Bend, Hochatown, lower McCurtain County area. So I'm not sure where. And at the same time, when you sent me the first episode, it was the second episode, we're referred to that I introduced him to another gentleman that used to be a arson investigator, and I took him to his house to meet him because he had an extraordinary encounter. That's also incorrect. I've never taken anybody over to this gentleman's house, and I mean, I don't know what to say. Just all the information is inaccurate. Even how he explained his knowledge of the Honebi incident, the siege where the shooting took place, his description of what happened is inaccurate. Even the location is inaccurate. And some of that information, it's well documented on the BFRO's website under Honebi siege. It says clearly what occurred, but this gentleman never read that, because if he would have read that, he would have had, better accurate information.
Yeah. And when we first talked on the phone, you did mention that you did work for the government and stuff. And I asked,
correct,
well, do you still look for Bigfoot? And you said, yeah, I look for Bigfoot. And then you shared your website, the videos and podcasts that you've done in the past. So if you did work for them and did Bigfoot research, it's all in the public's eye, I guess, but
yeah, it was never everything and anything I ever did in the Bigfoot investigations, whatever, that topic, let's use that topic. It was never crossed over into my job. There was never, I wanted to keep my name separate from that, because when I did work for the federal government, I was in certain positions that I was around some high level political people. And at the same time, there's also opportunities during that time that I had to appear in court. So, that being brought up when I'm testifying in a court or I'm going against a grand jury, that could be something a defense could use against me. So that's why I was very careful of keeping that separated, because that was my off duty time. That was my personal time. So
Okay.
there was no way I was going to compromise that.
Yeah, that's understandable. And one thing that did change since the last time we talked, I had a fan that reached out to me and emailed me a podcast that Dave did on Sasquatch Chronicles, and it's virtually the same exact interview that I did with him, minus the name dropping. So I don't know
Okay.
what happened from that interview to mine. If he felt like he had more that he had to tell, or if things were just added, in the second
Well,
interview.
there's, I would, and I would just put this out there. There's probably about 40% of what I've done over the last since 2004 that's probably on the internet, because there's a lot of stuff that myself and my organization, or our organization, and what I've done, with the tribal communities and some of the other shows, or even some of the stuff I've done, working and assisting, some law enforcement agencies with certain investigations that is not made public. So there would be no way for, the public to know that information. But the information he provided on your show was, some of it could have been from the internet, an internet query, but 90% of what he said was totally inaccurate. It's just, it was not right. It was incorrect. That's all I can say.
Okay, Troy. Well, I appreciate you giving your side of the story. And I just wanted to clear that up because, I don't like people name dropping on my channel, and I just want to hear the raw Bigfoot encounters and experiences, and I want to learn as much as I can about their behavior as I can. So if you would, tell us a little bit about yourself and, how you got into the Bigfoot subject and where it went off from there.
Well, I am born and raised in Southeast Oklahoma. I am, that's public knowledge. I was born in Henrietta. I spent a lot of time in Southeast Oklahoma. I had family that lived in Southeast Oklahoma. Normal growing up most of the time, back, I grew up in the 70s, in the early 80s. And, we didn't have phones. We didn't spend a lot of time on TV. So we spent all our time outside. Most of us ran around in the woods. Normal, typical, childhood. You heard things, you didn't make anything good about it. You heard little people didn't really talk. The town I grew up in was mixed blood. There was native people that lived in the community. So there was a lot of times I was in and around other native kids and their parents and, grandparents, and in passing and hearing things. But, the word Bigfoot was never used. They used, other terms and other names, local folklore, of their words for Bigfoot. But it wasn't until I was on the Boy Scouts, when I was in Southeast Oklahoma at a Boy Scout camp. And long story short, basically, me and another boy had, we got out of we came out of our tent late one night, and we had what we thought was one of the scoutmasters that was in the woods. There was a little bit of a moon, so you could see some things, and there was a large silhouette in front of us. And we kind of got scared and ran back. We thought it was a scoutmaster or somebody. And we went back, got in our tent. We peeked out the tent and realized, we did a little head count. Everybody sleeping around the fire. Like, well, no, it wasn't any of them. And it wasn't until we got home, when my mother made a comment. She said, boys, some lady said she saw a Bigfoot running across her back pasture, not too far from where you guys were camping. And then it's when I looked at my friend, I was like, okay, that was that. Growing up too, hearing noises, hearing weird sounds, footsteps. Well, it wasn't until I went in, graduated high school, went in the Navy, came back, got in law enforcement, moved down to Texas, went to work for the federal government. and I was in my office. This would have been probably the beginning of, or the end of the summer, the fall of 2004. And one of the other coworkers knew I was from Oklahoma, and he walked in my office and said, "Hey, you're from Oklahoma, and you've ever seen a Bigfoot?" Well, I did not know what he was saying. Didn't know where he was going with that. Long story short, I saw what he was seeing on the internet, and they were doing a Bigfoot expedition, BFRO, and he was trying to pronounce it. I walked over there and looked at his computer and said, "Oh, that's Honebby." And then instantly I had a flood of all those memories and things coming back to me. So I went home, reached out to them, said, "Hey, I'd like to go on this expedition." Went on the expedition. During that expedition, come to find out, I knew a little bit more about the topic, because some of the sounds that they would describe they would make, some of the sounds we heard in Honebby, the environment is the same because the Boy Scout camp wasn't too far from there. So, got done with the expedition. The curator for BFRO basically says, "Well, you're in law enforcement, you're used to interviewing people, and we don't have no investigators in Oklahoma and Texas." And that's how I joined. Then the following year, the expedition, then I was asked to organize and lead those expeditions. And consequently, we started one in Texas and one in Arkansas. And hanging out more in Honebby, got to know a lot of the people. And they had a conference and festival that started in 2005. Well, about 2008, by then I got to know a lot more people. The lady at the Chamber of Commerce, Vera, and they kind of asked me if I could kind of help with things. Now, I wasn't organizing anything. I was just helping run some ATV trail riding, and listen to people's stories. Now, 2009, the organization that was organizing the conference and everything, because it's a conference festival, it's two different things, but it's held at the same location. Myself and some of the other people, I had left the BFRO in 2009, and we took over the conference side in 2010. And the property there at the church camp allowed us to do, hold some events there. And it was about 2013, I was getting asked more to speak at some events, and they'd always ask, "What's the name of your organization?" And we're like, "Well, we don't have one. It's some of us that used to be part of an organization, and we're doing our own thing." It's about 2014 when we decided to come up with the name, the Native Oklahoma Bigfoot Research Organization. And we started having a little bit more, involvement with some other investigators that became investigators. And then it just kind of went from there, organizing the conference side of the festival and the conference, traveling around, doing some investigations, doing some of our own at properties that we already had access to, the friends of friends and people that I knew. And it just kind of grew into what it is today. We have a really good staff on what we call NOBRO. Guys and gals are scattered all over Oklahoma, and they have prospective areas that they're responsible for. We do a lot of educational. Some of our guys and gals speak at some of the libraries in Oklahoma City and up at Choctaw and Norman, and they have kind of a circuit that we've been doing. I speak a lot at some of the tribal events in Anadarko, sometimes in Tulsa. I've been to Wisconsin and speak up there at the Mohican tribe. So, and it's kind of grown into a organization that basically we help a lot of people that have stuff going on their properties, and they don't know what they're dealing with, or they know what they're dealing with and they want some help of how to handle it. So that's kind of our little meat and potatoes of what our organization does, is education, outreach, and assisting landowners and property owners that may have something going on.
Okay. Are you all right with telling us how you receive some of these encounters sometimes?
Yeah, no problem. It's kind of a mixed bag. Sometimes we do get contacted on our Facebook page or through the website, or I get contacted by a third party that says, "Hey, you need to reach out, to Troy." And And at the same time, there is a lot of law enforcement that do pass things on to us, or even will call me myself and say, hey, I think you can help these people. So because of my time in law enforcement, I've gotten known a lot of people. Plus, I used to teach in the academy setting. So some of the people that are now chiefs and undersheriffs and people in those higher rankings, those are the people that I knew. So they know me. So sometimes that's how we get some of that information, and they'll have somebody reach out to us, or they'll say, hey, they'll call me and say, hey, can you help these people? So it's kind of a mixed bag. You know, sometimes we do get stuff at our conference when we do our storytelling, or if I'm at another event, somebody will walk up to me on the side and says, hey, this is going on. Can you think you could help these people out or help them out? So it's kind of a mix of how some of that comes through.
Okay. So when property owners are having trouble, sometimes they call law enforcement, I guess, nonstop, and they don't know what to do with it, and they'll contact researchers. Do you think that's maybe how that the last guy I interviewed said you worked for the government? Do you think that's maybe how he got that idea?
It's plausible. I mean, it could be. I mean, it's just being from my background, and it could be conjecture in my sense of saying that's how he is, but until you or I or somebody's able to talk to him and say, hey, where did you get this information? Then, I mean, we won't know, because my feelings is that just he may have done a lot of internet searching and saw this, that, and another thing and put it together and decided that's what it was going to be. So, I mean, I'm not really,
Yeah.
it's hard to tell.
Yeah, it is hard to tell. Can you talk about information about the Bigfoot, or can you talk about the information that you learned about the Sasquatch with the tribal people, the Choctaw, and the natives of the land?
Yes. Yes. So probably about 2009-ish, I want to say, I was sitting with a tribal elder in Honabi. He has since passed away. He was a resident. Because I would be in town, because it was very familiar to me, and then spending the time there. So I spent a lot of time there. I still do, but I spent a lot of time there back in those days. And he asked me one day, his name was Mitch. He asked me one day, he says, how come you never asked me about Bigfoot? And I said, well, I'm not that guy. I'm not that guy that goes knocking on doors and leaving flyers. I said, if somebody wishes to share, I'm very open. So we sat more than once. I mean, for over probably more than a year, the times I'd come up, he would see me and we would sit and talk, and I may go over and sit with him in the yard, and he would share things of what, when you refer to, I guess I should say this, when you refer to, like tribal history, tribal knowledge, tribal customs, there are certain tribes that I wouldn't say poses it, they kind of indicate it comes from a different way, in a manner of how I'm trying to explain this is like the Choctaws. Well, when somebody like yourself and you say, yes, well, some of the Choctaws beliefs, well, when you say the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma has over 200,000 enrolled members. Well, you have the Choctaw Band in Mississippi. Well, there's another several thousands of enrolled. So when somebody says, well, what's the Choctaw say? Well, it's hard to say that actually that's what the Choctaw say, because you're referring to the entire nation. But there are elders, there are families that are Choctaw that have their beliefs, because sometimes if you talk to, this particular elder, he'll describe what his family has told him and what he believes and what he shares. And then you go visit somebody else and it's a little bit of a difference. So as a caveat, as I say, or a disclaimer, when I'm speaking publicly or something, people ask, well, what's the Choctaw people say? I'm like, well, we have to be careful, because I can't say that's what the Choctaw say, because you refer to and going to the Choctaw headquarters and saying, what do y'all say about Bigfoot?
Right.
Because
So
it's more of a family based type thing, because you could find some other Choctaw elders and they may not even say, they say, we don't believe that. So it's not in the what's the word I'm trying to find? It's not in the total aspect of how the Choctaw people believe. It's just, the same as if you were to go to the Navajo is the largest, Indian nation in the country. Their properties, the Indian Nation or the Navajo Nation covers four states. New Mexico, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah. And you would probably find the same way. But people that don't understand tribal culture, they were to say, well, the Choctaws believe this. Well, it's in my book, because I grew up in it and I'm part of that culture. It's kind of hard to say, yeah, that's what the Choctaws say, because like I described, it's not, I don't even know what the word I'm trying to find. It's just
they're
not
pretty
an
broken
overall
up.
blanket.
Yeah, they're like
Yes.
broken up in opinion. It's kind of like Americans of today here on this land. Some think it's a physical
Correct.
creature, primate, and others think it's a shapeshifter. Well, others have different opinions about them, like they're
Right.
entities and
That's correct.
whatever else.
But to answer your question, just about everybody I've ever talked to, regardless of what nation they belong to, what heritage they belong to, when it comes to native people, tribal people, most of 99.9999, percent, because I'm gonna give that 1% as a as a safeguard, they all believe that they are another race of people. They're another tribe of people, which, going into this in the beginning, I knew they were not an animal, because the things that I've seen and through these years, through the investigations, I had a 5-year investigation in Texas that I spent a lot of time on this property on the weekends through those, well, it's almost 4.5 years, right then and there. Yeah, they're not an animal. They are a people. They have and you've probably heard me describe it on some of the shows I've been on, and some of the stuff that we've been, I've connected to the Genome Project, and I described. I mean, they have a language, they have children, they have a family hierarchy, they have, they have the same thing we have, but they're non-materialistic. They don't need the things we do. They live apart from us. They choose to live where they live, and they do their own thing. But if you have somebody that has a language, has children, they grow up, there's a family hierarchy, they grow up, they move on and have their own family, what else would you call them? They're people.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you ever had any dangerous run-ins with the Sasquatch?
No, I learned a long time ago, outside of my own experiences, of how to handle certain situations, but plus kind of going off some guidance of how some of the elders describe how you should behave or how you should do things. Um, I personally have never been in a situation where I felt threatened, where I thought that this was a dangerous situation. But there are times when you learn to recognize that maybe they are uncomfortable with you being there or doing whatever you're doing, and then you just back off and leave, because you don't know what they're doing. So I've never felt threatened. I've never had a negative encounter. I mean, thinking back in I've never had a negative encounter. When people describe the behaviors that they get, I see a lot of these shows pop up. I see a lot of the, aggressive Bigfoot. Oh, they attacked this person. Oh, they were doing this or doing that. Through the years of doing these investigations, working with some of these landowners and homeowners that's had repeated long-term visits, and it starts out in that way where they think they have something that's aggressive, how I would be if I was living there. And of course, there's places where I stay, and there's places where I'm at in Honaby, and they do that same thing to me in the cabin that I'm in. Well, I don't perceive that as aggressive behavior. That's just them being them. How someone perceives their behavior, thinking it's in a negative way, another person will they can think of it in a different way. I've gone to several properties where they slap side of the house. Well, I share. Yep, they slap side of the cabin when I'm in it. That's just, they want you to come outside. I mean, that's just, they're trying to get your attention. If they were to be aggressive, and people have experienced that because I've talked to plenty, when they are upset and when they do not want you around, their behavior is going to be a little bit more aggressive to the part of you're going to get a feeling inside yourself. And that's that sixth sense we all have, the discernment, however you want to describe it. When you feel that, yeah, I don't need to be here, I'm leaving. Because, I'll be honest with you, they can project, I don't know how to say it, but they can project a feeling onto you to say, yep, I don't need to be here, I'm gone.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
they don't want you around. They can make sure that you are going to go.
Yeah,
They don't have to be physical. They don't have to be physical towards you, but sometimes you get somebody that's been out in the woods and they just are hard headed, and sometimes they might need that little push of, knocking a tree down and I'm rushing the woods and growling and hollering and screaming and stuff like that. Then that gets the person go away. But you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
I've had that, but it's been more of a kind of, I don't want to use the word playful, but we've been on many expeditions where a young one will come running up through the woods and come up to the point and stop. We'll all start laughing and giggling, and it will run off and kind of come back and stop, and you can hear it kind of doing whatever it's doing, talking or whoever they're conversing with, and they'll go parallel us, and we go back and sit down at the fire, and they'll chunk sticks, and we'll chunk sticks back over onto the ground, and and then finally they get bored and they leave. I mean, so it's however you perceive that activity or that action that they're doing. That's how you're gonna accept it.
yeah, absolutely. Sometimes the activity, explains itself. You get that feeling that you just shouldn't be in there, and it's time to back out and go home.
Yep. Yep.
Have you figured out what the X structures mean, the arches and the tree breaks? Have you guys come
Now
to a conclusion on
we
that?
there's speculation. Now I'm speaking for myself. I can't speak for my other guys, the other ladies in our organization. My personal belief, because I've seen the stick structures in different locations and in different manners where people go, oh, an X means don't go there. Well, I've been in situations where that wasn't the case. That I don't, let's put it this way, as big as they are and the things that they can do physically, I think they are smart enough to know that a X is not going to stop a person on an ATV. If they don't want you to go down an area, and then I've been on some properties where this has happened, where there's some trails that the landowners don't normally use, and they decide to go down it one day, and they get down in there, and something happens, and they get ran out there, and they go, yeah, there's something down in there, and they come back the next day, and they call me and say, hey, there's a huge tree down the trail. Well, okay, just leave it alone. Don't go down there. A month goes by, and they'll call back and say, well, we had to go down there and do something, so we cut the tree up, and we went down there, and does anything happen? Nope. Well, they left, came back. There was a bigger tree that was down. I was like, well, they don't want you down in there because they were blocking that trail for you to ride your ATV. So, I mean, they have physical ways to keep you out of an area. An X, some elders believe that I've talked to, it's like a road sign. When I was in the military, I was in a course that taught you how to survive, if you got separated from the rest of your main element. And I'm just kind of paraphrasing to make it short and quick, but they also taught you how to, if you and your buddy were out there and you were trying to find each other, there would be certain ways you could break branches and make little formations with branches and sticks and rocks. So if you came across that area, you realize, Troy's here, he's going that way. So Native Americans used the same, and that's some of the beliefs in some of the military aspects of some of the military manuals. Some of those techniques were taken from native uh, history. So talking to some of the, tribal elders through the years, and it's well believed by them that's exactly what they do. Those certain stick structures, bends, breaks, arches, X's, an X with a stick that leans through the middle of it, that's road signs apparently for them. Because there are times that I've been on some properties where I'll walk through the property with the landowner and I'll point out things. They're like, oh, I just thought that was a wind. Like, no, and I'll show them. And then you'll come back like a month later and there'll be a new one in a different area. So what they mean, I mean, I'll just be honest here. Scientifically, I could not go into court of law right now and testify that exactly that's what those things mean, because really nobody knows.
Right. Yeah, I've theorized the same, that they're road markers. X marks the spot that signifies to the rest of the clan that, a certain Sasquatch or individual is in the area. But at the same time, when you start looking at more structures, they become more and more complex, like, complex
Right.
language. So there's a lot more
Right.
to it. But yeah, I don't think it's necessarily for us. It's definitely a warning, because when you see the structures, you should know possibly there's a Sasquatch in there. But is it a warning that they put up for us? I don't know. I think it's more a language they use for each other to navigate through a vast territory.
I believe I'm behind you 100%. I'm behind you 100%, because the only thing that I use them for is if I go to a new property to do an investigation, or people say, hey, this area, it's haunted, there's noises and stuff going down there. And if I go down there and start finding indications, and some of them are very subtle and some are very obvious. But one of the benefits that I've had through the years, because of the job I have now, I work a lot in the severe weather environment. I deal a lot with tornadoes, damage, straight line wind damage. So little back pocket thing I have is I've got to experience a lot of tornadoes and wind damage. So I know what wind damage looks like, and I know what tornado damage looks like. And when you go to look at stick structures, breaks and bends on limbs or trees, whatever, I can define which is which, because there are sometimes I've gone to an area and looked at something and go, no, that's wind damage. That ain't a break. So I have a little bit of extra experience to understand the difference between what is tornado damage in the trees and what's wind damage and what's a Bigfoot structure or indicator. And we use them just as indicators, because there's places that I don't find nothing, and they didn't really have activity. It was people, a couple of pastures over, that would play loud music and ride their four-wheelers, and really wasn't Bigfoot activity.
So it is common to have stories or reports, and you arrive at the area and there's not really much going on there.
I would say maybe when people make a report, when you do your initial conversation, you get the email and they say, hey, and we tell them, they're hearing sounds. We tell them, try to record the sounds. I'll go through a little bit of a process to verify that, hey, and to tell you the truth, one of the things that I don't really concern myself about is the location, because people talk about hot spots. People talk, well, I live over here in such county, it's all Bigfoot over here. And I'm like, well, to tell you the truth, everywhere in Oklahoma, except maybe the Panhandle. I've never received a report in the Panhandle of Oklahoma. So anywhere in Oklahoma, anywhere in to me, it's all hot spots. And the thing of it is if you have reports in one location and only maybe one report in another, that doesn't mean that there's no activity there. It just means that either it's not being reported, or people are just not paying attention, or people are just wishing not to report it. So, because we've gone into the locations over the years, we'll keep tabs of our reports, and you might have a cluster of an area, and you might get one in another area. But if you start spending more time and talking to more people and getting to know people, you start, oh, well, that neighbor has a story. Go talk to him. Oh, that neighbor. And then go to Joe down at the coffee shop. And then you start, by the end of the day, you had 10 more reports you didn't have. They don't want to make, they don't want to make it public. So, just because an area don't have activity that's being reported doesn't mean it's not going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would say probably out of all the investigations I've done, places I've been, there may be less than a handful of places that I've been to that I never found any activity, never found any signs, and the people never call me back, and I'll reach out to them and they're like, nope, it's quiet. Could have been one just passing through. It very well could have been, because they'll travel. But 9 times out of 10, when we do get a report and they start giving us certain indicators of the activity that they're seeing and hearing, we pretty much know. Then we always ask, do they want us to come out and take a look around? A lot of times they do. Sometimes they don't. They just want to have a peace of mind. Is that what they're hearing, or is that what's going on? And then some will say, yeah, okay, I'm good. Nah, don't need anything. But some of them will definitely want somebody to come out, to take a look, because it kind of nags at them. Of they may go a month and never hear nothing, and then on 2 days in a row, their dogs are going crazy, the cats are going crazy. They're hearing noises and things are getting disrupted on the property, and they want somebody to come out. So,
Yeah. Have you ever investigated a property that's, let's say, close to town, doesn't seem like it would necessarily have Bigfoot activity, and when you arrive at the area, it's hot and active and there's all kinds of stuff going on? Or are they all mostly
well,
far out next to like federal
no,
state
no,
forest?
sir. No. And that segues into my 4.5 year project. 2005, in the BFRO, when people write a report, the investigators can log in and go see reports that have been submitted. And I saw one, and the people have moved, the project's over, the other people live there, so it's not a big deal saying where this is at. So right outside of McKinney, Texas. McKinney is one of the farthest north of the DFW Metroplex. When I saw it, I said, no way. Now, remember, this is when I first started. So I was like, no way. Literally, they're less than a mile from the Collin County Airport. Major, it's a huge airport, a lot of planes, there's a lot of traffic, there's a lot of people that live there. Now, it is, when you leave the main part of the town going out the farm to market road, you are starting to go into a rural area, but it's still not all that rural. And I thought, yeah. So I called. They said the right things, I was like, okay, I'll pick a day and go out there and visit with them. Heard their stories, sat down with them. Young boy, another girl, younger. I think the youngest one, he was 8, 9. No, I take it back. I think he was around 10. The girl, she was about 13, 14, and then the older boy was 16 going on to 17. So, they first started out as, Mom, we're seeing this. And they're like, oh, be quiet. There ain't nothing out there. Could have been a bear. It went on. And finally, the older boy, when that was going on, came out of one of the rooms into the living room and told Mother, I said, no, they're right. I know exactly what they saw, because one walked right in front of him when he was coming home from work one night on one of the back roads. He said, it's a Bigfoot. That's when they made the report. So long story short, I showed up, spent the day, it's going into the evening time. Now, the property is a rural farm type property. There's still enough light from the city that still lights up the property, so you can walk around easy without, bumping into anything. Now, it's still kind of dark because the backside of their property has some wooded area, and it's surrounded by feed corn or cornfields they use to grow, feed. And so I'm looking at the property, and I'm like, okay, well, something can't approach the rear, and that's where the kids always say stuff's going on. Well, that first night while we're standing there, I am facing a direction where there's one of the old original houses that the people that lived there, that was the first house that was on the property. It's a white structure. And while we're standing there talking in the yard, I hadn't looked up and noticed there was a black figure at the corner of the building. And by the time I raised my finger to point and go, well, who's that? It turned and shot across the side of the house, or the side of that structure, where you could see the separation between the legs and how tall and, how big it was. And the older boy turned and goes, oh yeah, that's one of them right there. And I can't tell you the feelings I felt, the cold chills, the excitement, just like, okay, well, they're not lying. Well, that started basically a 4.5 year project where it wasn't very far from where I was living. So I could go over on the weekends, and I spent, through the years, I probably spent every other weekend and sometimes every weekend over there. Go over on a Friday sometimes, go over on a Saturday. I spent hours, and I'd have to look at the records to tell you how many hours, but we're talking, think about there's 52 weekends in a year, and I spent just about every other weekend there, 6, 7, 8 hours a day there into the evenings, into the night. So you could do the math of how many hours I spent on that property. Got to see the the father, or what do you want to call it, the big one, the mother, and two younger ones. It was about my size. I'm about 5'7". And through those 4 years, watching them, catching glimpses of them, seeing them, in different fashions, grow, and they grow quickly. Their growth spurts are a lot quicker than ours. I've had some other investigations where some families have been watching and seeing them on their property for years, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, that one, we saw him when he was only about as high as the fence, and now he's 4 feet, 5 feet above the fence." So we do have documentation of people know that when they grow a little bit quicker than we do. They still could be probably 15, 16 years old, but they're still probably going to be about 7 feet tall.
Yeah, that is
So,
interesting. I often wonder how big the juvenile that I seen is now. If he's like huge or if he's still the same
well,
size.
2008, another gentleman in the group, he since moved up north. He and I were in Honaby with some friends, and there's some friends that live there now that built a cabin, and visit him all when I'm back. And 2008, we actually saw one that we nicknamed Nubby because the town's Honaby, but we called him Nubby. Well, he had some red Irish setter hair, charcoal black eyes, and we were probably about 30 yards from him, and he was standing there at the tree looking down at us because we were walking up the side of the mountain or side of the hill. And we stood there probably for probably 20, 30 seconds, and got a really good look at him, and he went on. Well, many years went by. I think it was probably, I have to go back and look, probably around 2016, back in Honaby. I'm there every other weekend, depending on what's going on, and caught the glimpse of him on property at where the church camp is. And I saw him very briefly, for just basically just a kind of like a blur. And there was an Irish red setter hair. And I was like, I wonder if that's him. Well, went on, I want to say 2000, when did COVID start? In 2020?
I think so.
I
Yeah.
think. Just before that time frame, I was up there. We had some events going on because I also work at the church camp and do some things at at the church camp, and was up there and was kind of off on my side down by the river, and was riding back on a four-wheeler and getting ready to come back up the hill to go back up onto the property, and something caught my eye to my right, and I turned, looked, and I think that's him again. I'm thinking, man, I wonder if that's him. Well, since then, I've seen him two other times, just briefly, and the last time I saw, just briefly, got to look, at his facial head area, and it just looks like he's a little older. And I don't know, but I think it's him. But he's 4 times the size that we saw him when that was back in 2008. Now, is it him? I don't know. I can't tell you, but it gives me the impression it is. So I don't know.
Yeah. Now, when you were working with the BFRO, did you investigate the siege of Honaby?
So no, not the initial investigation was in 2000. That's in January of 2000. That's when that took place. I didn't come on until 2004, but when I was going through the internal part of it and I was reading that story and reading that, well, I just had some curiosity. So, in my times going back up there and hanging out and seeing people and, not trying to get into people's business. And some of the locals I knew there, I knew them, I saw them all the time, and they, and just asked them about it. And they'll say, "Oh, you need to go talk to so-and-so." Well, long story short, and that's how I know this gentleman that was on your show said he talked to like 10 or 12 people. Well, I'll tell you, you can't talk to nobody in Honaby unless you know them, because they're not going to tell you if you're an outsider. And it took a while. to warm up some of the people, because I just had my own curiosity. But what I found out was that the people that did live there back then, they were, you know, they were not comfortable of how the way that ended. Now, nothing against the Humphreys, but the locals, basically their side of the story is that they said just leave them alone. Some of and I learned this back in the day, that if they were coming around taking something, leave them something, and just leave it and say, look, this is yours, this is ours. And that has been played over dozens and dozens of times. I've shared it with other people with other incidences similar, and it tends to work, because in 2000, from what I understand, the winter was very harsh. So the roads are basically shut down in the wintertime. You ain't going over the mountain. So a lot of people do harvest their own deer. That's for their family. And you can harvest deer on your property. You can hunt on your property. So that's what was going on. But I think there was a lot more going on. Some people, tend to, that's my property and you ain't coming and taking it. And there is that alpha male type scenario that's going on. And that's what I understand from some of the people that lived in Honabi and still live there from back in those days, that it was just, you had two alpha males that's going to go after, they're going to stand up to each other. Well, that occurred that night.
Yeah, that's frightening. Okay. You mentioned that you were part of the Human Genome Project. Is that correct? Am I getting that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you talk about the work that you did in the Human Genome Project and what you guys discovered?
The Sasquatch Genome Project. I want to say it was just after I left BFRO. I had one of the other BFRO investigators. It was actually working my project with me in Texas, because he was working the Adrian Erickson project, the Kentucky project, at the same time. What was going on in Kentucky? What was going on in Texas? So Adrian, funded me a little bit of some equipment, some cameras and night vision and stuff, because the other gentleman would fly to Kentucky. He'd come back to Dallas and work with me, and he'd share with me some of the videos from the Kentucky project, and we had some other stuff that was very similar. Well, that gentleman, that investigator, he called me one day and says, hey, there's a lady in East Texas that's doing a DNA project, and she's looking for a local investigator that she can, rely on, and somebody that is, that knows how to do crime scenes and how to do investigations and stuff like that. And I said, sure. Well, she called me, Dr. Melba Ketchum, and we were on the phone, and, she just asked me one day, he goes, what do you think they are? And I said, there are people. And she asked me some other questions, and I answered them, and she goes, well, I can prove that. I said, okay. Well, became really good friends with her, went out to the lab, saw some of the evidence. Matter of fact, the Justin Samasia, that's public knowledge on the internet. I saw the sample that she was sent that later was, the whole big thing about it being a bear. Well, I saw the evidence, so to speak. And, I worked with her very closely. If there was projects going on and there was supposedly evidence at a location, I would go out and verify. I'd go out and investigate and say, yep, no, this is a hoax, or this is not what it is. And at the same time, she, through the years, trying to work with some of the tribal communities aspect. And that's where I stepped in, because I had a little bit of that knowledge then, of how to kind of not really break that barrier, but of how to approach. And because one of the things that, that the project was, moving towards was, other than the proof that they exist, but to prove, what they are. Well, you can look up on the internet how it all went down, as far as the, scientific community and other Bigfoot organizations trying to, discredit her and, discredit the science and whatnot. And I didn't know a lot about genomes or DNA. Of course, I did my studies and, talking with her and talking with other people, and learned a lot more about it. But so back then in the early, well, I'd say the late, 2012, 2013, I think there was a monkey or something discovered in the Amazon or something. And they had one nuclear genome, one genome to prove it existed. Well, the thing of it is Dr. Ketchen has 3 nuclear genomes. So that's, you can't fake DNA. And people always go back and forth. So, oh yeah, it can be faked. And well, then that just proves all science then. But DNA is DNA.
That makes sense. If they say it's fake, then they're kind of saying that their techniques aren't valid as far as DNA testing.
Well, the thing of it is, she did the initial testing, but so nobody, and she understood that's the way DNA is done. That's the way things are like this are done. Well, for it to take legitimately, other labs need to test this. So 120 samples was sent out across the country to other labs for them to test it. Some of them come back, yeah, we don't know. Some come back, and actually, I think she has a letter, I think, up on the website that basically says this one lab said, hey, you've discovered a hominoid. What is this? That's when she was on the phone with them, but she has the email and the letters to prove it, that basically they were like, well, you just discovered a hominoid. What is this? And then she says, well, it's Sasquatch. And they said, well, you did it, but don't use our name. So you have labs that confirmed it, but yet it goes into, and I don't want to use the word conspiracy, but it goes into that whole thing about people didn't want her being the one to discover it. Well, I'm sorry, but it is what it is. She did. People don't like that, but I don't know, what can you say? Since then, we've taken, a little bit different, whatever information that we have now and we're pushing forward with. I mean, that's just, it's more of that knowledge to confirm exactly that what the initial thoughts were, what the DNA says, and then you fold that over to what, the native culture or culture from around the world, other native, cultures in those other countries. I mean, they have the same beliefs. They're a people. Now, there are other things out there that don't fit that profile as a Bigfoot, and some people sometimes cross those lines. I know a lot of people I've spent some time. I know a lot of people that live in southern Louisiana, and they'll be the first to tell you, yeah, that ain't a Bigfoot. What they have down there, the Rougarou, it's not the same. So, people have referred to the swamp ape in Florida, and so, and I know she's gotten some of that DNA, and it's not the same. So
there's like different tribes of Sasquatch or different types.
I think just my own opinion is, through the hundreds and thousands of years that let's think about this, for them to remain a people, for them to remain in their existence, obviously interbreeding and things like that probably had to have occurred. And with the way the DNA suggests that they are, and the way that native cultures and native people believe they are, then you probably end up having certain aspects of DNA or whatever that crosses, and then you start getting some really weird other things out there. And we know there's other things out there that's other than Bigfoot, but people misidentify them sometimes. The Navajo, I worked very closely with a gentleman that he was from there. He moved to Oklahoma. His parents moved to Oklahoma. And I sat with them, for a while. And they clearly tell me, yeah, your Bigfoots here are not the same as what we have. Because, there's just, the Navajo culture, even the Lakota Sioux, that live up north, the, Ogallala, that, they even describe that sometimes, the Bigfoots up there are just a tad bit different. Now, their behaviors are the same, but, it just, you have a mixed bag, and that's when we have situations that occur when people go, well, they're a shapeshifter. Well, you got to understand what a shapeshifter is. And, and skinwalkers, those are completely separate from a Bigfoot. That's not the same thing. but people get them mixed up because that's, people say, well, they've seen them go transform from one this to that. Well, I've never seen that, but I have seen some things that I cannot explain. But I've never seen them, form into another animal or form into a tree or form into something. I've never seen that, but I've seen some things that's kind of remarkable to it, which again, that's 100%, in my opinion, not an animal.
Yeah. So
Because
you
they have abilities. They have abilities. They have things. We refer to in the native cultures. They're of medicine. They have strong abilities that we cannot comprehend. We just can't fathom. Our brains don't. We live in a cultural where we have fast food, computers, and we always have to go to work. So, if you spent the time in the woods and have seen things through the years, then sometimes what I like to refer to is the more I see, the less I know.
Yeah,
I
that's
see something,
absolutely
I'm
right.
like, okay, I just, I see some things and it backs me up. Like, okay, well, got to write that one down. Never saw that before.
Hmm. So you have seen things that you can't explain, things that defy logic.
Exactly. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. If you would, I don't know if you have time, but if you would go back to the encounter where you and your friend ran into the red-haired Sasquatch on the trail, what what were you guys doing? What was happening before you guys encountered the Sasquatch? And just kind of go
Well,
into that if
that,
you would.
that, it, it's very interesting because it leads it into another story. So we on the weekends back then, and we still do, but on the weekends, we all were going up to my friend's house, and we would, we'd be there, and it's Friday night, have a campfire, food, and next day we'd, help build this, help build that, because he was still, trying to get everything built at the cabin. And he goes, man, I got to show you. I think I found two graves. We're like, what are you talking about? These two areas up there on the side of the hill above the cabin that looks like they're about 7 feet long and about 8 feet wide, and they're next to each other. They're just like graves. They're like little mounds. Like, oh, cool, let's go. Well, there's four of us. We walk up the hill, and two of them break off. My buddy, or the guy that lives there, breaks off and goes, he's gonna go over here. Well, I notice my other friend standing in front of me. He's looking up the hill because I could tell by his body language. I'm kind of like, well, what are you doing? So I'm just kind of moving around because we're not on a trail. We're kind of walking up through the woods, walking up the side of the ridge, you know. And I stop, and he's not talking. He's just looking straight ahead up the hill. And I'm like, okay. So I get behind him and I look over his shoulder up the hill. And I was like, oh, okay. And there he was. He was leaning out around the tree looking down at us, but he would every now and then he'd turn his head looking back over to where the other two walked, the other two had walked off back through the woods. And he looked back down at us, and he's leaned out a little bit more, and he'd look back over there at them, and he's leaned back at us. And 20, 30 seconds, and then finally, my buddy over there yells, goes, hey. I go, what? He goes, come here. I'm like, no, you need to come here. So we heard a noise. It, like it always happens, you diverted your attention. We both looked away for just a second. We looked back up a hill. He was gone. Now we could see up through the woods about another probably 50, 60 yards. Now it's trees, but the trees are not big enough to hide behind which one he was hiding behind. And where he went, no clue. He wasn't there no more. And then they walked over and said, man, I can't find him. So we walked with them back over there. He goes, it's right here. And there was an area that may have been maybe an old logging road at one time back, eons ago, because the ground, you could tell there was a road, but it had been grown up. So, because the logging industry in there has been there for, hundreds of years in the mountains. So, and I looked at it, and he goes, no, they're right here. It's just flat ground. He goes, I swear they're right here. Well, incidentally, a few years later, I'm up at the north end of Oklahoma on an Indian reservation, and out with some friends, and we were doing some stuff there, and me and some of the guys were across the river, and we saw on the side of the bank of the river, like, man, see that hole? Because you can't see it when you're on that side. You had to be on this side to look back across. And this is the river that basically you had almost like 40, 50 foot, banks that go down to the river when the river's low. And we're like, man, that's a huge hole. Anybody could go up in there. And we're like, all right, well, we're going to go back across, because you'd go back down, walk across a railroad trestle to get back over. They're like, we're going to go find it. There were some trees and some bushes over there above it. So we like marked it. Okay, that's it. Well, we got all the way back across. They hollered, the house was not too far away. They go, hey, food's here. So we took off to go eat. We're there at the house and we're like, oh man, we forgot to go look for that. And the family was there, said, what are you talking about? And we told them. And I remember the grandmother laughing at us. You're never going to see it. And we got up and we're like, oh, we're going to go out. Well, we went down there. Long story short, we went down. We never found it. So we come back, and one of the boys that was there with me, one of the guys that was there with me, had asked. That would have been his cousin's grandmother. Asked, and specifically, she said, "It's there. They're just not allowing you to see it." And then that's what brought back my memory of where he saw those two graves and what he thought were graves. And that came back into my mind. And a little bit later down the road, I got back to Honebby, and I was sitting there with my friend there at the cabin. And I was telling him about it. He goes, well, let's just go up there and look. So we walked back up there to that area. We couldn't even find the area no more. It was completely, the ground, the side of the hill was completely different. You thought we were confused. We never even found the area, because he said he put a little ribbon on the tree to mark the area. We never found it. So there's been some other instances that's been similar to that, where there's some strange things. I'm not saying it's Bigfoot related. I'm just saying there's some strange things that I've encountered, Bigfoot and non-Bigfoot, that just leaves you it leaves you scratching your head.
Yeah, I understand. I've had the same situations in the past where I'm like, man, was that even Bigfoot, or was that something else going on in the same area that Bigfoot activity
Well, let me
is
ask this
happening?
question.
Yeah.
I got a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
In any of your times out, have you ever had in instances, or you ever had a situation where you may have lost some time? You thought you were out there for hours, and then you kind of look down at your watch, or you look at your phone and you go, man, I've only been here 20 minutes, but I feel like I've been here for an hour. And the opposite. You've been out there for hours, but then in your mind, you think, I've only been here 20 minutes. Have you ever had that happen?
I haven't had that happen, but I was recording with my GoPro in an active area, and I was finding all kinds of strange things. And then every video that I played back was like really fast. Like, I don't know, like everything was like in fast pace. And I don't know, it was only when I was in that structure area, but I don't know. I didn't know what to make of it.
It doesn't surprise me.
Yeah,
It doesn't surprise me. I don't. Now I have some other guys that do, but I put my technology away years ago. When we're out in the woods, matter of fact, people laugh at us, and we've had hundreds of people on our expeditions through the years. When we go down in the woods and stuff, we go down in the daytime before the sun goes down, so you get acclimated to the area. You know where the stumps are, you know where the trails are, you know where things are at. Because things look different when it's dark. But we have accustomed them. We do not carry flashlights. We do not carry cameras. We do not. I mean, we have our phones in our pockets, but we don't carry technology, because I learned back during the Texas investigation. During that time, I was talking to an elder at that time, the only one I knew during that time, and I was telling him about what was going on and everything, and he just told me, put your camera away. So when I put that video camera that Erickson and them sent us, for me to do the project with, when I put that away and stopped carrying it, that's when everything changed. That's when I wouldn't say they were coming out, but they were kind of showing themselves a little bit different, and they were getting a lot more closer. If you were standing at the tree line, you could pretty much make their outline even in the daytime. That's how close they were getting. So that was the last day I ever picked up a camera. And it's the last day I ever picked up any technology. I don't do technology. Now, we put recorders out a lot because I know they know what we're doing, and we don't hide it. And that's what some people's techniques where they fail. They try to hide what they're doing. If you are open about what you're doing, sometimes you do get some results. But when you try to hide it, when you try to trick them, or you try to, covertly do something, that's when, because they're always watching. And that's why I tell people, because people goes, well, how do they know that camera's there? Because they're watching you. They're always watching. When you go down in the woods, they're around and they're always watching. They know where you put that camera up.
Yeah, they're super sensitive, and it seems like they can see super far away, and they're always aware of their surroundings.
Yes. Yep. And they're never alone. That's one thing people ask me all the time. I've had a couple of shows in the past ask me about, what my thoughts are of trying to capture one, coax one in, or do whatever they do. And I always tell them, so look, they're never alone. They're never alone. Now, what you and I mean by never alone, you are about 50 yards in the woods, and I'm about 50 yards away. But their distances, they could probably be on the other side of the mountain. When the one hollers or whispers or whistles or whatever, it ain't gonna take long for the other one to get to the other side of that hill very quickly. So, and I always tell people, they're never alone.
Yeah, they're always around the area, and it seems like they spread out and they have like these watch positions.
Yeah. Yep. That's correct.
Okay. Have you had any other close encounters with the Sasquatch? Any other ice sightings?
This have been, what is this, April? So March. I was up in Honabi. We were up there doing some stuff for the church camp, and I'm still actually on the fire department there because I keep my medical license, because I do stuff there at church camp. I'm the camp medic whenever we have activity, events and stuff. Well, we were up there doing some stuff. Well, we had a gentleman that works with me back here in Texas, and he comes up, he comes up to enjoy the ride four-wheelers and hanging out, and he's heard us talk. He's been enough time in the woods, but he was standing on the front porch of the cabin looking across the property, and I had just walked inside. I was going to go to the restroom. Well, I went in the restroom and I finished. I come out the door of the bathroom, and he stuck his head in and goes, dude, you need to come here. Well, he and I were the only ones on that side of the property. There's other people that live on the property, but they're usually they usually go in and go to bed, and it's the way the property's laid out. Who's on property and who's not. Well, I stepped out. He goes, dude, I just saw something standing over there by that building, because the buildings at night, they light up. So if you were standing over there, you'd silhouette yourself against them. So he told me, he goes, yeah, this thing just walked over there and stood. Looked like it. Because I asked him, because now this, from that distance from where he was standing to over there, is probably about 120 yards. Not quite, maybe 120, but it's a length of a football field. And he told me that he saw it walk, stop. He thought it was looking in his direction. He saw it walk back to the left. Well, while we're standing there, because I'm standing beside him, I'm looking. Now, when we're talking, and everybody around us kind of knows, we may not look at each other while we're talking, because that's how you see things. If your attention is diverted in one direction, you're going to miss something over here. So I'm always scanning. I'm always scanning the property. I may be just turning my head, looking back. Well, there's a dining hall across the property, and some of the lights are on the inside. Well, I hadn't just glanced over there, and now this was just probably within maybe 2 minutes of this occurring. And I looked over and I go, oh yeah, there he is. And I pointed back across, and he saw the figure walk back across between us and the dining hall, where it silhouetted itself against the light that's on the inside, and walked back over into the dark. And he turned and goes, well, I missed it. And I said, yeah. I said, well, because you were looking at me. And it's because we tell each other, it's not rude not to look at each other when we're talking, because that's how you pay attention to what's going on around you. Even when we're sitting down at the campfire, we sit across from each other. So you can look behind me and I can look behind you, because that's how you catch things. If your attention is at the fire, or your attention is on your phone or at each other, that's how you miss stuff. So you always got to be looking. You always got to be looking, off into the woods or across the field or wherever it may be. And so that was in March. And the next day, I drove over on my four-wheeler. I had him stand right where we were standing. I drove over on my four-wheeler, and we had radios, and he told me where to position myself. Well, I got off the four-wheeler and stood there, and he goes, no, He goes, "You're tiny." So I moved my four-wheeler over there. I stood up on the seat. He goes, "Nope, you're not tall enough." I was like, "Okay." So I said, "We'll do this again at nighttime. Put the same time of night in the same location in the same, the same conditions, because that's how you want to reenact that scenario, because the shadows are going to be different, the lights are going to be different, the moon will be in a different position. Now there was no moon that night, but there were some lights on the property across the way that help illuminate that part of the property, but there's some trees there. It causes some shadows. So the night fell the next night, and we tried to recreate it. And even there was another gentleman there with us, and I had him wear all black, because what he saw was all black, because normally most of the ones there are typically all black. And we tried to recreate it, and we couldn't. We were way too small. He could barely see us, because what he saw, he said, stood out. He said it was massive. Matter of fact, we determined with using a stick and a flag and stuff that the shoulder width, and he only saw the head areas when it moved, when it turned to move. And when it stood still, all he saw was the outline of the body. But the top of the shoulder area where the head starts would have been about 9 feet. So he was well over 9 feet. So we're like, yeah, that's pretty typical.
Yeah, that sounds like a big individual.
Well, it's big enough, because even if I stand over there and I'm looking back across, because through the years, we have activities. So, and sometimes there may be 50 people on property, and sometimes there may be 1,000 people on property. But even there's times there's only a few people. If I'm sitting on the porch of the cabin, I can look across and see who's who. I can tell. But I've been there long enough to know when I see something that's way bigger than a man at 100 yards away, or even, it's a 40-acre area where the buildings are at. So even if you're at one end of the property and you're looking at the other end, a man is going to look relatively small. And usually when you see one that kind of darts out of the woods and may dart across or do something, it's quite obvious what it is, because looking at a person, a 6-foot male human at a distance, they look relatively small at 40 acres. And when you see something that's twice the size of that, you realize, yeah, that's not somebody on property. That's our visitors from up on top of the hill.
Yeah. I feel like your frame of reference would be off. Like if there was a Sasquatch and a person was standing next to it, you'd notice the difference. But if that Sasquatch was out at a distance, pretty far away, you wouldn't be able to tell if it was a human or, a Bigfoot.
Well, most of everything that I've seen and listened to people describe, most everything that I've seen with my own eyes,
Mm-hmm.
their shoulders are massive. So
Yeah.
when a person puts on a suit or a person puts on heavy clothing, they still cannot come to the girth and the massive shoulder size and the barrel chest, the chest, upper torso that they have. I mean, you could, but then your legs are going to look off, because their bodies are in proportion.
Yeah,
When they
absolutely.
are that massive, and plus it makes it hard if someone was trying to fake that. They don't walk correctly, because when the Bigfoot, when they walk with a purpose. Their step is coordinated. They flow when they walk. It's natural. And when somebody else is trying to do something, it's you can tell the difference. And that's a lot of times that's what our investigators, and that's what we use when we get video sent to us. We're like, yeah, no, the gait's wrong, the shoulder swing's wrong. They don't swing their arms that overly exaggerated. It's almost like, when they're in a walking mode, their upper body does not move, but it's just their legs that move. It's just like they're floating across the ground. Some people call it, and I've seen some of the Kentucky videos. That's exactly what they look like. There is a purpose when they walk. There's a method the way they walk. And when
Mm-hmm.
someone tries to duplicate that, they over exaggerate it. So
Yeah, I agree. The Sasquatch that I seen, the adult one, I noticed more. I was more focused on his feet. Like you said, he had a purpose, and I don't know. People always try to put words in my mouth, and they always say like he had really long arms. Like, yeah, his arms were long, but they weren't like overly long. They weren't extra long like
right,
people always describe. Like I really noticed
right.
the feet. The feet were moving with a purpose, and I didn't really notice these super long arms, but I don't know. I guess everybody's encounter and experiences would be different depending on the area
It
that you're in.
is. It is, and it also, through what I've learned, and it's nothing against the eyewitness. It has nothing to do with the character of the eyewitness, but a lot of our investigators in our organization, we have a few that are retired and former law enforcement, and or even military. So, or even in a very, very experienced hunter. Those people have an eye for detail in certain regards. A police officer's job is to observe. So his eyes, he's got a trained eye to observe detail. A hunter is the same way, somebody in the military, but you have an average person that don't spend a lot of time in the woods. If you put them in the same scenario this other person was in, they're going to probably miss 10, 15 different details that the other person can pick out. Because and that's one of the things we talk about, and what we teach people when they come on expeditions is basically it's about detail. So if I'm sitting in a chair looking through the woods, now we have an advantage because we've been in those woods there where we take people for years. So I know where all the trees are. I know where the big trees are. I know where the V's in the trees are. I know where the stumps are. I know where the trail is. I know if I'm looking this way, oh, what's that? No, that's a cedar tree back over there. It just looks like a person, but it ain't. So I know my terrain. And when something that doesn't belong in that, that's when I start paying attention. And then when it finally, I don't know if it's looking at me or what, I don't know. But then when it finally moves, because if you train your eye on it, it's either going to stand there and try to out, you know, outdo you in patience, or it's going to get up and move, or it's going to move. A lot of times we teach people to observe an area. If you see that area get dark, like the moon or the stars are kind of shining, and an area of the woods is a little bit lit more than this other area, and all of a sudden that area is dark, well, pay attention. And then if you get bored with it, look away, and then look back, and then you can see light again. So that tells you something was standing right there, because they will do that a lot. And that's how you use your shapes, your shadows, your the position of where you're setting, because sometimes somebody sitting next to you cannot see the exact same thing you are, because the direction you're looking is different than that person that's only maybe 2 feet away from you. So it's all about detail.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have one more question before we end this interview.
Yeah.
You worked with the BFRO, and I noticed you were there for, I don't know, a handful of years. Is there a reason you left?
Yeah. So, and it's nothing against them, but so when I was organizing and leading the Oklahoma expeditions and the, Texas and Arkansas, well, the curator at the time had posted one of the, this time is going to be the expedition. Please, sign up to attend. Well, I noticed in the article of that said, led by Troy Hudson, federal agent, blah 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 blah. Trying to give it some credit that I wasn't just some Yahoo. And I reached out to him and said, man, uh, uh, I don't like to have that on there. Just say I'm a law enforcement officer. Don't say a federal agent or anything like that. Well, it went on, and we had a lot of people wanting to come to Oklahoma. Now, if you could ever find those people in those expeditions, they'll give, don't ask me, ask them. We had all kinds of stuff going on. It was one of the higher, most interested expeditions that people wanted to go to. So we would get, a lot of people wanting to come to the expeditions. Well, some of the other BFRO members in other areas was getting a little frustrated because we were getting all the attention. Well, it boiled down to, well, Troy's doing this, Troy's doing that. He's trying to date the women on the expeditions. They were trying to throw mud. And at the same time that was going on, that's when my mother had passed away. So I was dealing with that. And some of the other guys locally that I brought on, you'd come on an expedition, and then I want to be an investigator, and then you'd become an investigator. So I had a handful of them, and they just kind of like one day was telling me, dude, you don't need this. You can do your own thing. You know where everything is. You got your own contacts. Start your own group. So that's how some of us broke away.
Okay. Yeah, that makes
A
sense.
lot of
So,
a lot of drama,
yeah,
a lot of
so
drama.
so Bigfoot drama unfolded and you decided to peace out and do your own thing.
Well, yeah, and it's not like I intentionally wanted to do my own thing, but it just like once we left, we still had a lot of contacts, still had a lot of people, and people would still reach out. And then that's how we just like, you know what? Well, I guess we'll do this. And like I said, that's how it molded. And then that's when I kind of got in with some of the people that organized the Honaby Festival and the conference, and that's how I kind of got involved in that. And then we took it over in 2010, and we've been running it ever since. So it's just kind of blossomed from there.
Yeah. And do you still do the conferences or was that
Yes,
only
sir. Yes,
okay.
sir. No, we've, ours is the 6th and 7th. It's always the first weekend of October. We've got a good lineup with the speakers this year. And I do a lot of things other than organizing the conference side, getting the speakers in, making sure they have everything. And some of our guys that's in our organization actually work the conference. We have a guy he does AV, IT, he handles that side. But I'm also doing other things. I'm also running the security for the property, and I'm also the camp medic. So I've got, 10, 15 things going on. Plus in the evening, I'm also doing the storytelling. So I lead the storytelling, each evening. Um, so it's just grown into, we're always trying to find more people to help us out because it's just, when you have thousands of people on property, because, it's also a festival. There's also vendors and there's music entertainment and there's places for kids to play. Last several years, they've had the helicopter rides. So, I mean, there's always something going on. And then, through the rest of the year, I'm either going traveling and speaking at events. Our guys are speaking at, some of the libraries or community centers or wherever it may be. And then when we're not doing that, we're doing investigations.
You're staying pretty busy in the Bigfoot world, huh?
Yep. I just got asked today to speak at some Choctaw events for next year. So already got those on the calendar. So, and our guys have got their stuff on the calendar for some of the stuff that they're doing. So yeah, there's always something going on every month. And we also have a training program for our investigators. We started that a couple years ago, where it's usually it's usually after the first of the year. Everybody comes together, everybody comes to Honaby, and we have classes. We have new investigators that that we bring in, are trained on how to do photography, how to work cameras and video, what's the best way to take pictures, and if they are interested in that stuff, we train them because sometimes when they do investigation, there's prints or a handprint on a window or something, so we show them, they get shown how to do that. We also teach how to do interviews. How's the best way to do an interview. A Bigfoot interview is different than interviewing a person that's been a victim of a crime, so there's different interview techniques. Interviewing children is different than interviewing an adult. So there's techniques that we use. And also one of our guys is a print cast. That's what he does. So he teaches how to print cast and what materials are to use. And then they do like a mock investigation. So when that's over, those new people that's in the group, they get assigned one of the senior, more experienced investigators. And when they go out to do investigation, they go with them. So, I mean, that's something we started a couple of years ago, and we've had some other people involved that's like what we're doing, and they're kind of come in and helped. We've had a retired State Bureau of Investigation, OSBI person, well known in the Bigfoot world, Harvey Pratt, come in and teach some of the courses. So, they're the product that we're putting out in the field it's not just somebody showing up in a pair of jeans and a t-shirt and a ball cap, and saying, "Hey, what's going on?" I mean, they got a polo with their name on it and the logo, and they're there to do an investigation. So we've had some of our investigators approached by some of the local police when they're in town doing investigation, thought they were another law enforcement agency. And they go, "Nope, we're here doing a Bigfoot." And then they get involved and go, "Well, where are you at? What are you doing?" So then they get excited about it. So, I mean,
Yeah,
it's pretty busy.
that sounds like a lot of fun. I'll have to keep my eye out for one of the events, and it'd be cool to make it out.
Yep. Just stay in touch with me, and you would probably like the area, and you could come down to the conference, and you know um, and that's, we've got a lot of people that way that it comes in every year because they come in just the atmosphere, what's going on. you hear the speakers and then the storytelling, and you can go out and go adventuring up on the mountain or down by the river. It's just, there's always something to do there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you ever have anyone having extreme Bigfoot activity and you need somebody to come out and film, let me know. I'd love to come out and check it out. But I understand. I know you don't like to run camera equipment or any equipment at all. So,
well, we've had a few documentaries. We've had a few people come out to do stuff, and what they find sometimes is they get out there and get stuff going, and their stuff don't work. And so we always tell them, we warn them ahead of time, and we always tell them that sometimes the technology just doesn't work when you're out there. So they usually turn it off, set it off to the side, and by the end of the weekend they have stories to tell because stuff's been going on. Stuff happens to them. So, but
yeah.
I mean, anybody we've had some native college and a few others come to do some projects and stuff, and they get some, they don't get nothing on camera, but they get some stuff happen that makes it worth watching because they have crazy things that occur behind the camera. But yeah.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show and telling your part of the story and sharing with everyone who you really are.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime. And like I said, nothing against that guy, but just I felt compelled to, let you know that, because again, other people forwarded that to me and said, hey, listen to this guy. And I listened to it. And I'm like, that's not correct. And that's the reason why I reached out to you.
Yeah. Well, I feel like if you were a federal agent, you wouldn't be publicly talking about Bigfoot and sharing information openly.
Well, let's just say if I was and that did occur, I probably wouldn't have had my job very
long. Yeah, that's true.
So.
Okay, Troy. Well, if you have any questions for me, feel free to ask.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think that pretty well covers the interview. I'm going through my list of questions, and you basically answered them all. So, yeah, I appreciate you reaching out and sharing all that with all of us.
Well, I appreciate it for having me. And, there's, if you ever need something later down the road, I mean, we've got plenty of people that's had experiences. We've got some people that don't mind being on shows, but some people, are reluctant to. But, if you ever need something, just let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you ever cross over state lines and you're in Missouri and need a hand, just reach out.
Yeah, I will. Appreciate it.
All right, Troy. Well, I'll let you go for now. Right. And it was really nice talking to you.
Yes, sir. Anytime. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
All right, guys, like I said, that was a controversial interview. Not exactly where I want to take the channel, but luckily Troy was willing to admit that Bigfoot is real, and he is open about his past research and involvement with the topic. He also claimed the Sasquatch have a supernatural side to them. So I feel this interview really cleared things up, but I will say, I will keep my true opinion to myself, and I think everyone should remain open-minded to things that don't make sense. Truth is stranger than fiction. Alright, that's all I have for today. Thank you everyone for watching. Take care and be safe.